Welcome to the Legal Leaders Podcast with Ollie Rock. Jon Gavenman is a seasoned corporate attorney and current partner at Cooley. He's been advising startups and public companies in some capacity since 1991. With a career spanning more than 3 decades, Jon has had a front row seat to Silicon Valley's evolution. Jon is a life cycle lawyer and works on a broad variety of deals, with early stage founders to unicorn conglomerates, where he advises with early stage financings through IPOs and acquisitions. In this episode, we discuss Jon's incredible career, beginning from when he was earning his bachelor's degree at Pomona College. We hope you enjoy the episode. Hey, Jon, it's great to have you on the podcast.
Thanks, Ollie. Thanks for having me.
You have such an expansive career, and you've been a partner at Cooley since 2008, working with some of the most successful startups and public companies. Before we dive into your amazing career, I do have an icebreaker I want to ask you. And the question is, if you had to switch to a completely unrelated, different practice group, what would it be and why?
Yeah, that's a tough question. Boy, you didn't give me any warning about that question. An unrelated practice group. I think I would probably go into securities litigation.
And why is that?
Because for me, one of the things I liked to study was securities. Like when you go back to my undergrad background, I've always been interested in the stock market and how the securities markets work. And if I'm not going to be a corporate deal guy doing corporate deal guy stuff, I think I'd rather at least be arguing about material omissions, material misstatements, false and misleading statements under the securities law. Like I wanted to be a securities lawyer for a really long time.
Love it. That's pretty cool. Well, let's dive into your career. I know that you studied math at Pomona College, if I'm not mistaken. So I do want to ask, what inspired your transition from studying math to actually go to law school?
Sure. So undergrad at Pomona was actually a math econ major, so mathematical economics. And if you go back through my history, my family history and the like, what you'd find is my parents were both in tech in Silicon Valley. I grew up in Silicon Valley surrounded by tech. And I was also surrounded by a lot of finance and a lot of different people doing things with money and things with stock. And I was always interested in how that market worked, the stock market and things like that. So for me, going to Pomona was an opportunity to study the stock markets. I kind of knew in high school I wanted to be a lawyer. Not sure why that was. I don't know if it was a Perry Mason TV show or what actually prompted the interest, but I always kind of thought law school. And then I also thought stock market. And coming out of Pomona College, there were lots of opportunities to go into investment banking and stuff. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to go to law school. But I wanted to combine my love of tech, my interest in law, and my love of the stock market. And I did not know at the time what a securities lawyer was. I didn't know such a person existed. But I kind of had an idea of those 3 things forming a combination of a career. And then I stumbled into what that is. Oh, yeah, it's a securities lawyer. And oh, by the way, you can represent venture capital-backed startup companies doing tech, doing securities law. And there it is.
Love it. So you kind of had an idea of what you wanted to do, which is awesome. And is that what inspired you to come back and go to law school in San Francisco?
Yeah, with no disrespect to Los Angeles, I went down to Los Angeles as a Northern California kid, believing that the smog and the traffic and everything I had heard were going to depress me morbidly and that I would be back. And it wasn't so much that, but it was a function of this is where I'm from. My family was all here. My grandmother was here. Her siblings were here. And the Silicon Valley back then in tech was kind of the epicenter of the universe. There is tech in LA, and I've had clients over the years in Pasadena and Irvine and, other places in the greater LA area. But the heart of it for me is Silicon Valley.
And how was law school in San Francisco in the late 80s, early 90s?
I loved law. I loved being back in San Francisco. I'd spent a lot of time there as a kid, being there for law school. I guess I would say law school itself was daunting. I have no lawyers in my family prior to me, so I didn't have anybody that I could lean on and say, what was that going to be like? So I had no prejudged notion of what that was going to be. But it was fun to be in San Francisco. It was fun to know the city really well and be able to get around and be able to walk home from law school each day and get some fresh air and just be back home while I was studying law.
Love it. And what was sort of the notion around big law at that time? I know it's like very coveted right now, and a lot of folks are sort of gunning for that in law school. What was the atmosphere around that?
So for me back then, big law, the word big law, I don't know even know when it came into fashion, but Wilson Sonsini, where I started my career, I was about the 300th lawyer in the whole law firm. And so back then, and it was considered the largest securities law firm in the Bay Area at the time, and one of them. And for me, I never thought of it as I was going into big law. I thought I was going to do the kind of work that I wanted to do at a firm that did the kind of work I wanted to do in glittering spades, meaning it was the premier firm for what I wanted to do. And it was one of a few firms that were really specialized for it.
And you were a securities lawyer?
Yeah, that's looking back. That's I guess what I was. I never really thought of it that way. I mean, I went into that field for sure. And when I wrote all my cover letters as a law student, it was all about being a securities lawyer. That was clearly the field. 33 Act, 34 Act, a little bit of Investment Company Act, but mostly 33 and 34 Act securities work.
And how was the state of the tech industry in the early 90s when you were there?
Um, I Apple Computer went public in about 1980. And so for me, looking back on it, I wasn't there at the very beginning. I was in junior high school when Apple went public. But I was there at the very front end of the train for sure. If you figure it's been 45 years since Apple went public, and I've been practicing law in this field for about 33 and a half of them, I'm definitely at the front end of the train, and it was exciting. You were seeing lots of revolutionary technologies, not very different than today, just different revolutionary technologies.
Gotcha. And what was it like being an associate at Wilson in terms of, maybe the culture and how that's different from how things are today?
I would say when I joined Wilson, I was so happy to be there. And it's an interesting ride culturally from the standpoint of, and I'm not going to say anything negative about Wilson. I think they're a terrific firm. I think I did not understand all that I was getting into about law firms and their culture and what drives their culture. And what I realized ultimately for myself is I really need to be on a team of people that collaborate intently with each other and not so much compete against each other. And so at the margin, if what you've set up is a system that fosters that competition, that's probably not going to be the system that is best for me. And I prefer to help my teammates succeed and not compete against them every day. So life as an associate, though, you didn't feel that. I was in a great group. I got great training. I did a lot of fun deals with a lot of great companies. Highlights
Yeah.
would be Cirrus Logic, Silicon Graphics. I mean, it was kind of a who's who of Silicon Valley back then. And so it was really fun to be part of
Yeah.
that for sure.
That's incredible. And were you sort of set on going for the partnership track?
Yeah, having gone straight through from undergrad to law school and kind of knowing that I wanted to be a lawyer and knowing the kind of law work I wanted to do, and then having found it at Wilson Sonsini, it never dawned on me to really think about not being a partner. And I think that's one of the things when I look at today's world, when I look at my kids and what their aspirations are, when I look at the kids who are starting law practice nowadays, I'm not so sure that is front and center in their minds. I think for some of them it is, but for the vast bulk of them, and maybe this is the distinction in big law, I think more people today join that firm with a view to taking a longer view of where else they're going to be in the long run. I didn't do that. I came into the law firm wanting to be a partner in a law firm, wanting to do this kind of work, and I stayed.
Yeah. Would you say that you're sort of a fan of folks taking a gap year and getting work experience and exploring sort of whether it's specific practice groups or other careers before going to law school?
It's interesting. Having not done that, I would say I'm none the worse for wear not having done it. But I think if you're not sure what you want to do, and like one of my closest friends in high school growing up, he and I swam together. He went off. He had a good shot at making an Olympic team many years ago. He almost made that Olympic team. He just missed. But during the year or two he was training really hard to make that team, he started paralegal work. About the same time I was a young lawyer at Wilson Sonsini. And what it taught him quickly was all of the encouragement his parents were giving him to maybe go into the practice of law like Jon Gavenman, et cetera, made absolutely no sense for his life because he didn't like what he was doing. And so he went and found what he really loved doing, and he's become incredibly successful at that. And so for me, it's more just a question of, do you have some idea what you want to do? If you're not sure, law school's a hard environment to be unsure of yourself in. Don't go to law school, word of the wise, don't go to law school if you're not prepared to be there and you're not sure why you want to be there. You'll get outworked and you'll get outclassed at every turn by people who do know why they want to be there. And so I think if a gap year is what needs to crystallize that, sure, do that. My daughter did that. It worked out great for her. She's doing the kind of law she wants to do now. And I think gap years are useful for people in that circumstance.
Yeah, I love that take. It seems like the average age has been increasing and it seems like law schools are prioritizing older candidates because so much of their rankings are based on job outcomes. And it seems like folks with work experience tend to place better. Do you have any thoughts on that?
It's interesting. I'm not surprised at the phenomenon. I haven't followed the statistics. I'm not surprised at the phenomenon. I would say Berkeley, way back when, produced a group called what they called OWLs, older, wiser law students.
Still
And
around.
yeah, I'm sure it is, because it's a great way for socially people who have come back to the school to figure out their next chapter of their career, can connect with each other and probably have shared experiences. I think it's a terrific thing. And I also think, yeah, sure, there's advantages, but remember, you're speaking to somebody who started the practice of law at Wilson Sonsini at the ripe old age of 24 years old. So, it's pros and cons. It's really a function of what is it that you want to do. For me, I knew what I wanted to do. I just had to find the place that was doing it. And I knew that place existed. I just didn't know where.
Yeah.
I lucked into finding it. But if you're not sure or the like, and you want to take a couple of years, come back to it, sure. Just be sure of yourself when you do it.
Yeah, it's so great to be speaking with you because you've been in the practice of law since the early 90s. So it's just great to get your take on these sorts of things. So going back to your career, you made the switch from Wilson to Venture Law Group. I'm curious how that opportunity came up because it sounded like you were interested in the partnership track initially.
Yeah, I was still interested in the partnership track. What became clear, and again, Wilson's a terrific place. I have nothing but great things to say. Venture Law Group was a terrific place. They had sort of different cultures. And the way it came up was in 1993, Craig Johnson, who was considered the number 2 corporate guy, I came to read that in the press. I didn't know that at the time. Number 2 guy at Wilson Sonsini in corporate left with his group and formed this firm called Venture Law Group. When they left in 93, I honestly thought they were crazy because they had put all their eggs in a couple few baskets of that founding group. And if it hadn't worked out, I think it was not the kind of thing that you were coming back to Wilson Sonsini from. And so for me, I didn't understand the move at the time, and I stuck at Wilson because it was the best firm in the Bay Area for what I wanted to do. I was getting great training. I was working with great people and all good. When you come to find out as about a fifth-year associate that life as a partner at Wilson can be internally competitive, that's when, for me, the penny dropped, and it's just not who I wanted to be, who I was going to be. The best version of me is not that environment. Would I have succeeded in it? Sure, I'd have succeeded in it. Would I have been happy? Yeah, not so sure. And so I called up the guy who had recruited me to Wilson way back when, my summer associate mentor. And I met him and had over a glass of beer, told him the story. And he encouraged me that I ought to go talk to the 2 sort of senior partners at the time, most senior partners at the time at Venture Law Group. And a few weeks later, that had sort of run its course. My daughter had been born about a month before I announced my departure from Wilson Sonsini. And then a few weeks later, I landed at Venture Law Group.
Nice. And can you give me an idea of how big was the firm at this time?
How big was Wilson or VLG?
VLG.
VLG, I think I was the 55th lawyer to join, something like that. I was in the 50s someplace.
It must have been such an exciting time. I mean, you were there from 96 to 2003, right during the dot-com boom. I mean, how was that? Was it just going insane in terms of the tech industry?
Yeah, Venture Law Group, when I got there, and there were moments where I wasn't so sure, but once you are in it and there, I realized immediately, I found my people, I found the corporate culture that I wanted in the law firm around me. So that was kind of perfect. I stayed on the path of wanting to make partner, and I ultimately made partner at Venture Law Group a couple of years after I joined there. So that all rolled just fine. The culture, the atmosphere, Venture Law Group, I think, had taken Yahoo public. They had incorporated Yahoo and taken it public in like 1994. And I think it was the first internet public offering. Like it was, if it wasn't the first, it was probably one of the first three. And so what you had going on was this bubbling cauldron of the internet coming to life. And I mean, really coming to life in a lot of different forms. You had online, the ability to do anything you wanted to do online, buy print, buy dog food, buy cat food, buy veterinary supplies. The early days of the internet were kind of a trial and error. How do we get people to use this system, and how do we make money getting people to use this system? But yeah, it was a revolutionary, I guess I'd say 6, 7, 8 years path there.
Was business just sort of pouring in? I mean, was there even business development because there were so many companies, looking to grow and exit?
There was definitely business development. I can't remember a world when I didn't do any business development. I think that's been sort of part of my DNA. I would say it was, like I said, it was a bubbling cauldron. And to be in Silicon Valley in the venture ecosystem during that time, yeah, there was a ton of activity. And then the capital markets run certainly supported the ability for those companies to, at a very early stage, go public, raise yet more money, keep growing, keep building. The M&A market was correspondingly white hot. Like, it was just a good time to be there.
Wow. And you referred to it as a bubbling cauldron. So when was the inflection point to when it boiled over?
In I don't remember the exact date in March of 2000, but I do remember sitting in my office. I was in the middle of two public offerings. One of the public offerings was scheduled to go on their roadshow a couple days later, and the Wall Street Journal came out with an article that, in fairness to some people that called me, well, it was only on page 7 of the Wall Street Journal. It's not like it was on the front cover. But it was a devastating essay in the dot-com bubble business models. And what it really said was, there are no really good internet business models out there. The world has invested like crazy in these things that make no actual sense. It proceeded to give 2 examples of those things from one industry. Well, they happened to be, one of them was my client that was about to go on the roadshow for the IPO, and the other one was their chief competitor. And the result of that article was neither company went on a roadshow. Everything was postponed. And when you look out kind of 6 months later, 3 rounds of layoffs later, both of those companies went the way of Silicon Valley wreckage, meaning they did not survive. And that was, for me, the asteroid was that March moment in the Wall Street Journal.
Gotcha. And it's amazing. And so Venture Law Group is no longer around, obviously. Can you speak to sort of what happened that, I think it merged with Heller Ehrman. So what did that look like?
Yeah, so in early 2000, Venture Law Group had made a business decision internally, that it was a better use of our time to work with young, emerging growth, venture-backed companies than established public companies. And we took apart our business model and we rejiggered it to do just that. And we never really recovered from that. From late 2000 to the middle to later part of 2003, I think we merged with Heller Ehrman in about September, October of 2003, if my memory serves. And what I would say is we started looking for merger partners in the form of bigger, more stable platforms, probably in the maybe beginning of 2003, late 2002, beginning of 2003. And we were just under a lot of pressure economically. We didn't have work like many companies, but we didn't have a lot of work to keep ourselves busy with venture-backed startup companies.
So you were the firm was over leveraged with emerging companies and startups and not enough capital markets work?
Not enough capital markets work and not enough public companies work. So we made a strategic decision in the beginning of 2000, maybe late 99, but the beginning of 2000, to exit public company clients and to exit capital markets work. And both of those things sort of happened to be decided, a whopping 3 months before that March Wall Street Journal article, asteroid hit.
Wow. And did Heller Ehrman sort of specialize in capital markets, or was it also emerging companies and capital markets?
No, Heller Ehrman was a big San Francisco based, historically primarily litigation firm with a relatively small corporate practice. And so what I think they saw in us was the ability to immediately have a Silicon Valley presence in corporate emerging company ECVC work and a way to complement what had historically been a big litigation firm with a small corporate group, a way to build out their corporate group with a group of people that they knew by reputation.
Got it. And since we're on the topic, you've seen a lot of different new technologies. And in the 2000s, I know a lot of folks saw the internet and maybe predicted that it would be the end of something, end of an industry, or the end of, people doing a certain type of work. Have you seen that same pattern with AI?
It's very early days of AI, but you're certainly seeing similar sort of reverberations. I think the world doesn't yet know, much like in the early days of the internet, call it 30 years ago. I think the world sees a big open green field opportunity and doesn't have yet a good solid understanding of the use cases and the business cases. I think there's a lot of people imagining what those will be and a lot of people experimenting in areas where those will be, and it has yet to crystallize. So it is, I would draw a lot of parallels there between kind of 1994 to 1996 internet and where we are with ChatGPT, OpenAI, and those things today, and the notion that lots of business models believe we have to have an AI component to our business plan in order to get venture funding. I mean, it's a very similar ethos to, well, what is your strategy for the internet?
Right. It just seems like there's so much doom and gloom. And I personally think that it's just going to help, people do better work and become more efficient, that sort of thing. And yeah, I just feel like there's so much doom and gloom around that. And you've seen that happen, sort of those kind of thoughts happen before. So that's why I thought it'd be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, there's always going to be naysayers with new technologies. And I think, who knows, right? I mean, I think people probably also thought initially the self-driving car. And I suspect when, if Waymo cars start driving in circles and honking their horns late at night and it makes the national news, that's not a great moment in tech innovation. But I also think in the long run, for people, a self-driving car allows for liberated transportation in a way that a lot of people who don't drive or can't drive today, for example, and by the way, I don't represent any autonomous cars, so it's not like I'm plugging a client here. I just think a lot of people today suffer from the inability to use those things. And sure, there's Uber and Lyft and taxi cabs and things like that, but I just think there's room for innovation there for sure.
Love that take. Amazing. And so you were at Heller Ehrman until 2008, which is obviously a definitely another memorable year. So I'm curious about, where was the state of your career when you're at Heller Ehrman, and were you thinking about leaving?
So I had thought about leaving Heller Ehrman probably in 2000, around 2005, certainly by 2006. I never did it, mostly because I've had the great blessing of working with my friends for now going closer and closer to 30 years. And so my friends were all there with me. I got to go to work every morning and see them, got to work side by side with them. So that's what kept me there. And that's what our team that came here to Cooley has stayed a team throughout this process. That's a huge,
Wow.
when you look back on again, why did I leave Wilson? It was that cultural thing. That cultural thing, I found my people, and I've run with that group of people. In
Wow.
'08, did I think about leaving? Sure. I mean, as Heller went through its own trauma, and in a very short summary, what I would say is Heller was a big litigation firm, and by unhappy coincidence, a bunch of big litigation cases all settled at the beginning of '08. At the same time, Heller was trying to reinvent its internal culture around a shifting legal market. And those two things conflued to form their own internal asteroid, a little bit like Venture Law Group booting its public companies and capital markets practices. It was a similar sort of set of events that drove Heller to seek a merger partner, and ultimately drove some partners out of Heller that ultimately, in Heller's case, unlike Venture Law Group, caused actually bank credit facilities to get tripped up. And then once that happened, the whole boat just tipped over. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but there you go.
Yeah, no, it's super helpful. And that was October 2008 was when you transitioned to Cooley. So is that where you said you were working with your friends? Is that where most of the people you were working with went? Or, and this was 2008. I mean, the folks I talked to who graduated from law school during this time said it was almost impossible to get a job. So yeah, I would love to just get sort of like, what was the state of things then?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the state of my practice was good. I mean, I was an up and coming young mid-level partner at a tech-based ECVC practice with a good, solid entrepreneurial network, and so my practice was doing fine. And so the move to Cooley was pretty easy. Cooley is super well branded for what I do. It's super well branded for what we as a group that came over did. There were 42 different law firms that reached out to us, meaning the venture law group people within Heller Ehrman, to say, would you be the venture law group people within us? Cooley obviously has its own brand, so they weren't looking to us to be their venture law group. They are a venture law group of their own kind. It was more just synergistic addition. It was accretive. And so I think they just saw the opportunity to take a big group. I think it is true. I've always said this, and I think it's true. We were the largest single group to leave Heller Ehrman. There were groups that left before us. They were just smaller. For us, it was important that we bring our admins, our paralegals, all the team, as much of our team that we could bring with us, we wanted to bring. There were other firms that did not have that kind of interest in us. They wanted, let's say, 3 or 4 of the most accretive partners, but didn't want any associates, didn't want any paralegals, didn't want any admins. And for us, that just wasn't the way we thought about our team. And so our team coming with us became sort of paramount in our minds. And it worked out great. That team came with us.
You said 40 people?
42 different law firms. The group of lawyers that came over, gosh, that's a long time ago now. I would say there were probably 35 to 45 lawyers that came. That might be wrong by plus or minus 10, but I don't think it's that wrong.
Gotcha.
It was a big number.
And John, what's interesting is you said your practice was thriving at this point in time. So, I mean, you joined in 2008. And so as soon as you joined, I mean, was there still a ton of work? Was there still a lot going on?
Yeah. So the financial crisis of '08, and it is an interesting dynamic. A lot of times you have macro events that hit the U.S. economy, but they don't necessarily touch the pace of innovation at the innovator level. So the entrepreneur system, the ECVC world, that small venture-backed thing that is starting up, it's still years away from emerging from stealth or from emerging into the market. So that pace of innovation kind of continues no matter what we're doing. It continued even during the dot-com bubble burst in '01 and '02 and '03. There were still companies being formed. And I think when you look at, I think it has long been said, like when the '87 market crash occurred, I was in college, but Cisco was incorporated following that sort of downturn. Cisco Systems went on to become an enormously successful company. So it is the case that a lot of times when that forest fire sweeps through, the little acorns have all planted themselves in the ground and they're just waiting for the fire to stop, and then they sort of emerge afterwards. So '08 didn't really affect my practice very much. I had good, solid public company clients. I had good stable of different stage private companies, and we just kept going. What was the case was, there's 12% unemployment in Silicon Valley. To your point, associates in law firms had a very hard time. Some of our associates had a hard time getting across from Heller Ehrman to Cooley because Cooley had their own associates, and there wasn't as much work as there had been. But yeah, so around the edges, for sure, that's a correct point. But for us, we mostly got across.
Love the analogy about the forest fire coming in and so much opportunity. It's an optimistic attitude as well. I do want to shift to ask about your personal practice and some of the ways you develop business and that sort of thing. So I want to ask kind of a broad question. Do you have a preferred way to build a relationship with clients? And if so, what is it?
Yeah, do good work. Do good work, be responsive, be accurate in your work, be attentive to detail, be responsive. be available, and be interested in what your clients are doing. I think part of when you said it was interesting, an interesting take. Am I optimistic? Yeah, I'm generally optimistic. You have to be. And by the way, the entrepreneurs are congenitally optimistic. So if you think I'm optimistic and I'm just a lawyer, yeah, my client base, I guess it's rubbed off over the years. I am opportunistic. I'm opportunistic. I'm optimistic about the future. I'm optimistic about tech. I like the entrepreneur world. So if you do good work for people, what I have found is they come back to you and they will tell two friends that you do good work for them. And those people will seek you out. And over time, it's just the compounding effect of that network effect of enough people know who you are. They will consistently keep you busy if you keep doing good work.
Yeah, you had told me a success story of a client. I think it was overseas. It might have been in Japan when we spoke before that you work with, and they turned around and created another company.
Yeah.
Can you share some, like maybe a success story of what did that look like, working with the same client over the span of multiple businesses?
Yeah, I mean, so it's a company. You're right. It's good. You have a good memory. The company was a semiconductor company, fabulous semiconductor company, like many I have worked with over the years. We incorporated them. We raised several rounds of venture financing. We sold them to a company in Japan. They became the darling. Their technology became the darling of that company internally, and that company ultimately made the decision to spin that technology and that company back out of itself in the form of a public offering in the US. And so that same management team that had run that company since 2007 ish continues to run that company today and is a multi-billion-dollar market cap public company. And that for me is kind of the quintessential. Sure, I incorporated the company way back when. I was there 6 months before we incorporated it. We did their Series A round when we did a core license. We raised our first institutional round of funding. And then we just rode with the company through their growth, their development, their ultimate sale to the Japanese company, and then rode with them back to being a public company in the US.
Amazing. And do you have a preference for working with clients for the entire life cycle? I know there are some partners that maybe they like to work up until exit, or obviously, capital markets partners. Do you have a preference on that?
I do. I'm what they call a life cycle lawyer now. I used to be called a hybrid, but for me, you're correct. There are some people here, some of my partners love to do only public company work. Some of my partners only want to do private company work. Some of my partners only want to do M&A. Some of my partners only want to do capital markets. For me, I like such a huge variety of that stuff. I like actually all of that stuff. So I don't mind. I'm a trained capital markets lawyer from when I was a young lawyer. I'm a trained M&A lawyer from when I was a young lawyer. I can do those deals, and I like being able to pair up with people who are expert in them today and who are living and breathing the rules in the market today. But at the same time, it allows me to stay close to my clients through whatever they go through. And that to me is where I derive the most fun, because if you're around the entrepreneurs and you have fun with the technology, and again, having grown up here around technology my whole life and being a lifelong video gamer, because I just love playing. I love playing with computers. I love playing with technology. That's it. That's me.
It's so awesome. I mean, just looking at your background on the website, you're working with G2 and they're, a $1.1 billion valuation, but you're also doing Logic.io Series B at 25 million. So it's just really awesome to see sort of like the diversity that exists in your practice.
Yeah, I love the different scale. I love seeing two people and a dog in a garage trying to revolutionize something. I love seeing late stage private companies. G2 is a good example. There are other good examples in there. And I love working with public companies because they do different stuff altogether. And it's a different body of law, which keeps the job interesting every day.
Love it. Well, John, you're almost at 17 years with Cooley. I mean, what's the state of your practice these days?
The state of my practice these days, still good, still the same mix of clients, public and private, same stages, and from early stage to later stage. I would say I'm giving thought to when am I going to hang up my cleats and who am I going to transition my practice to? That person knows who they are. I feel good about that. I feel terrific about that. Clients of mine like that person a lot, and all good. And so we'll see what the next few years bring. But this has been such a tremendous run, both at Cooley and generally. Like if I had my career to do all over again, I did exactly what I thought I should do, and I did it exactly the way I wanted it to. So
I love it. And last question, looking back on your career, what advice would you tell your younger self? It sounds like you wouldn't change a thing, but maybe broadly for folks who are in law school right now and they want to follow a similar career path.
Yeah, I would say first and foremost, focus on what it is you want to do. If it's possible to decide, by the way, law school, I remember law school, it's very broad, and you suddenly realize how many different things you might find interesting that you might go do. If once it becomes clear, I would say pursue your passion with interest because you'll be better at it if you're passionate about it. And if you enjoy it every day, it's a much better thing than not enjoying it when you just get up. And that applies to anything you do, right? Whether it's swimming for exercise, walking for exercise, you better enjoy what you do. So that's the first part. The second part is, like I said earlier, I didn't have lawyers to ask this question of. If I had it to do all over again, knowing what I know now, I would focus in on the corporate culture of the law firms that you're focused in on, because that corporate culture either aligns with your views, values, where you think you'll be the most successful, or it doesn't. If you're me and you didn't know any better, you picked the best firm in the Bay Area and you went and did that and you were passionate about it and all good. If that firm had the greatest culture on the planet, there's a good chance I'm not talking to you today from Cooley, right? Because I love what I do and I've stayed doing what I exactly started out doing. So the magic there, the difference is in the culture. And do I regret changing firms? No. Everybody goes through a learning phase. I went through mine. I was fortunate to only do it once, really. I found my people when I got to Venture Law Group in 96. And for almost 30 years since, I've run with that group. And that's because that culture was kind of the perfect mix for me. But that's what I would tell people in law school as they think about the career. And I wouldn't be daunted. Y'all have worked so hard to get to where you are. I am not daunted, or you should not be daunted by the words big law. You will work hard wherever you go. But by the way, the hard work's worth it. If you like what you do, the hard work won't seem like hard work.
Love it. Love that take and really appreciate you taking the time to do this, Jon. Thank you so much for your insights and perspective.
No problem, Ollie. Thanks for having me again.